I-45F, never thought I'd be writing this post, but after 2 decades of managing corporate events and handling difficult clients, I've learned that sometimes the most challenging conflicts come from your own family. I'm reaching out because recent events have left me questioning everything I thought I knew about family loyalty and relationships. For context, I've spent the last 20 years building my career as an event director at one of Boston's premier corporate event management firms. I've organized everything from 1,000-person tech conferences to intimate executive retreats. My professional life has always been about bringing people together, creating environments where connections can flourish. The irony of my current situation isn't lost on me. 3 years ago, while managing a major tech conference in San Francisco, I met my now husband, 43M. He wasn't like the typical tech executives I dealt with daily. During setup, when our main presentation system crashed, instead of demanding immediate fixes like most attendees would, he quietly stepped in and helped resolve the issue. He was, and still is, a senior programmer at one of Silicon Valley's leading tech companies, but what struck me most was his humility and genuine desire to help. Our courtship confused my family from the start. My sister Rachel, 40F, and mother, 68F, especially couldn't understand why I, the person who used to organize our family's legendary parties and social gatherings, would be attracted to someone they perceived as antisocial. But what they saw as antisocial, I recognized as thoughtful introspection. While they valued constant social interaction and small talk, I found myself increasingly drawn to his world of meaningful conversations and genuine connections. "He's nothing like your ex-boyfriends," Rachel would point out at every family dinner, as if that were a bad thing. My previous relationships had all been with extroverted business types, the kind my family approved of because they fit our dynamic. But those relationships had always left me feeling like I was performing rather than being myself. My mother's reaction was more subtle but equally disapproving. She'd wait until my husband left the room before starting her carefully worded concerns. "Honey, I'm just worried about your social life. You used to be so involved in the community. Now you spend weekends at home or at those quiet restaurants he likes." She couldn't understand that I had grown tired of the constant networking and social obligations that had dominated my 30s. The tensions escalated when we announced our engagement. Instead of the excitement I'd hoped for, I was met with what I can only describe as intervention-style concern. My father, 70M, usually the diplomatic one, actually suggested I take more time to think about it. Rachel organized a sister's night out that turned into a 3-hour session of her listing reasons why my husband wasn't family material. "You're in corporate events," she exclaimed after several glasses of wine. "You should be with someone who enhances your network, not someone who'd rather spend weekends coding or reading." What Rachel and my family failed to understand was that after 20 years of constant networking and social orchestration, I found peace in my husband's quieter approach to life. Our wedding last year became another point of contention. We opted for an intimate ceremony with just 50 guests, held at a beautiful historic library. My mother nearly had a meltdown when I told her we weren't having it at the country club where all our family weddings had taken place. "What will people think?" became her mantra for the months leading up to the ceremony. The wedding day itself was perfect for us, elegant, meaningful, and focused on genuine connections rather than social obligations. But my family spent the entire event making passive-aggressive comments about the unusual venue choice and how different it was from normal family celebrations. My husband's family, though smaller in number, showed more support and understanding than my own. After the wedding, I hoped things would improve. I tried to bridge the gap by hosting small family dinners at our home, where my husband could interact in an environment where he felt comfortable. But even these attempts were met with criticism. My mother would comment on how basic our entertaining style was compared to her elaborate dinner parties. Rachel would constantly remind me how I used to be the life of the party. Last week, everything came to a head when my mother called about an upcoming family gathering. "We're having a special family dinner on Saturday," she said, then paused before adding, "Just you, though. We know your husband doesn't enjoy these gatherings, so we thought it would be better if..." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. I felt my blood pressure rising as I replied, "Sorry, Mom, but I'm not coming without my husband. That's not how marriage works." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with anger. When I told my husband about it later that evening, he just laughed it off with his usual grace, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. I thought that would be the end of it, but little did I know it was just the beginning of a series of events that would force me to make the hardest decision of my life. The very next morning, everything changed when Rachel called. That morning, Rachel's voice was bubbling with excitement over the phone. "Oh my God, you won't believe it," she squealed. "Mark, 41M, proposed last night." Despite our recent tensions, my heart leaped with genuine joy. I knew how much she cared about Mark, a high school history teacher she'd been dating for over 2 years. He seemed perfect for her, outgoing, social, and deeply invested in community activities. "That's amazing, Rachel. I'm so happy for you," I said, already grabbing my car keys. "Are you at Mom and Dad's?" "Yes. Come over right now. We're starting to plan everything." 20 minutes later, I walked into my parents' familiar living room. The scene was exactly what you'd expect from our family. Mom already had wedding magazines spread across the coffee table, Dad was beaming proudly, and Rachel was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. Mark stood nearby, looking both proud and slightly overwhelmed by the flood of wedding talk. For a moment, it felt like old times. Rachel showed me her engagement ring, a beautiful vintage-style piece that perfectly suited her taste. We spent the next hour going through wedding magazines, discussing potential venues, and debating dates. Rachel wanted a spring wedding, giving them about 8 months to plan. It reminded me of when we were younger, dreaming about our future weddings together. Then Mom's expression turned serious. "The only issue is..." She hesitated, glancing at Dad. "We're a bit tight on money right now." The room grew quiet. "With your father's recent medical bills and everything." She didn't need to finish. Dad had undergone a series of expensive treatments for his heart condition over the past year. Without hesitation, I heard myself say, "I'll give you $10,000 for the wedding." The room fell silent for a moment before Rachel launched herself at me, nearly knocking me over with her hug. "Oh my God, are you serious? Thank you, thank you, thank you." Even Mom and Dad looked impressed. "That's incredibly generous of you, honey," Mom said, sounding sincere for the first time in ages. Later that evening, I told my husband about everything while we were having dinner in our kitchen. His response surprised me. "I have an idea," he said, putting down his fork. "What if we also get them tickets to the Maldives for their honeymoon as a surprise gift?" I stared at him, dumbfounded. "The Maldives? But that would cost about $20,000. He nodded. "I know. I'll use my personal savings. I've been thinking about what you said about building bridges with your family. Maybe this could help them see me differently." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. This was the man my family thought was cold and arrogant, offering to spend his own savings to give my sister her dream honeymoon. "Are you sure?" I asked, still stunned by his generosity. He smiled and pulled me into a hug. "Absolutely. But let's keep it a secret until the wedding. It'll make it more special." That night, as I lay in bed thinking about everything, I felt hopeful for the first time in ages. Maybe this would finally help my family see my husband for who he really was, not the antisocial person they'd labeled him as, but the incredibly thoughtful, generous man I'd fallen in love with. The months leading up to Rachel's wedding flew by in a whirlwind of planning and preparations. Every weekend seemed to bring a new decision to make, and Rachel wanted my opinion on everything. I was touched that she valued my input, given our recent rocky relationship. "What do you think about this venue?" Rachel asked one Saturday, showing me pictures of an elegant converted warehouse. "It's smaller than the country club Mom suggested, but I think it has more character." "I love it," I said honestly. "Plus, it'll probably cost half as much." Rachel nodded, chewing her lip. "That's what I was thinking. Mark and I want to keep things simple, no more than 150 guests. We're both trying to be practical about money." I admired her approach. Unlike some brides who went crazy with expensive demands, Rachel was being surprisingly sensible. We spent hours comparing flower arrangements, tasting different menu options, and visiting dress shops, always with an eye on the budget. You don't think it's too plain? She asked, twirling in a sleek, minimalist wedding dress that cost a fraction of what Mom had expected her to spend. It's perfect, I assured her. Sometimes less is more. Every time we made another decision or checked another item off the list, I couldn't help but smile, thinking about the surprise waiting for them. My husband would occasionally ask how the planning was going, and I'd catch him grinning when I mentioned Rachel's offhand comments about wanting to travel someday. I can't wait to see their faces, he said one evening. Have you looked at the resort photos I sent you? The overwater bungalow is going to blow their minds. His enthusiasm made me fall in love with him all over again. Here was my antisocial husband, genuinely excited about giving my sister and her fiancé the honeymoon of their dreams. But as the wedding date grew closer, something started nagging at me. 2 weeks before the big day, I realized what it was: we still hadn't received our invitation. At first, I tried to brush it off. Rachel had been so busy with preparations, and she'd involved me in every detail of the planning. Surely it was just an oversight. Still, something felt off. My husband and I had our outfits ready, we'd arranged time off work, and we'd been actively involved in all the planning, but we didn't have an actual invitation. After a particularly restless night thinking about it, I decided to stop by my parents' house after work to ask Rachel directly. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw both my parents' cars and Rachel's beat-up Honda. Perfect, everyone would be there. I grabbed my purse and headed to the front door, still telling myself I was probably worried about nothing. After all, we'd been instrumental in planning this whole wedding. There had to be a simple explanation for the missing invitation. I walked into my parents' living room, trying to keep my voice casual. Hey, Rachel, I wanted to ask you something. We haven't received our invitation yet. I'm sure it just got lost in the mail or something. Little did I know, this simple question would trigger a series of events that would change our family dynamic forever. Update 1, Rachel shifted uncomfortably, glancing at our parents before answering. Oh. Actually, I wanted to give it to you in person. She pulled out a cream-colored envelope with forced enthusiasm. Here you go. My hands trembled as I opened it. The invitation was beautiful, elegant script on thick paper. But as I read, my stomach dropped. There was only one name on it, mine. Rachel, I said slowly, why isn't my husband's name on this? She straightened up, her hesitation replaced by defiance. Well, she glanced at our parents, we decided to keep the guest list really tight. Only the absolute closest people. I felt like I'd been slapped. Closest people? He's my husband, your brother-in-law. Come on, Rachel rolled her eyes. We all know he's not really family. He never tries to be part of anything. I turned to our parents, hoping they would correct this insanity. But Mom just nodded while Dad wouldn't meet my eyes. We support Rachel's decision, Mom said. Your husband doesn't enjoy these events anyway. He always looks miserable at gatherings. That's not true. I protested, but Dad cut me off. Be reasonable. He'll just make everyone uncomfortable. Then added, besides, this way Rachel can save on catering. Save money? I repeated incredulously. You're excluding my husband to save on a plate of food? It's my wedding, Rachel crossed her arms. I decide who comes, and I don't want him bringing down the mood. He can stay home and code. I stared at these people I'd known my whole life, trying to understand. How could they so casually exclude my husband? The worst part was how rehearsed it seemed, they'd clearly discussed this before. Then it hit me, while my husband had been planning their dream honeymoon, they'd been plotting to exclude him. Let me get this straight, I said quietly. You're excluding my husband from the wedding I gave you $10,000 for? Money I gave without conditions? Rachel's smugness faltered, but she recovered. Well, that's different. You're my sister, and... I cut her off. But here's what's ironic. My husband spent 3 months planning a surprise. He was going to give you an all-expenses-paid honeymoon to the Maldives. $20,000 worth of luxury resort, overwater bungalow, first-class flights, everything. The room went silent. Mom's hand flew to her mouth, Dad's jaw dropped, and Rachel's face cycled through disbelief, shock, and calculation. The Maldives? Rachel's voice turned sweet. Oh my God. I was kidding about the invitation. Of course he's invited. Let me fix the card. She reached for her purse. I stepped back, disgusted. Don't bother. The trip is cancelled. What? No. Rachel jumped up. I was joking. Don't be sensitive. Honey, Mom stepped in, voice syrupy, your sister was just stressed. Of course we want him there. Dad nodded. Absolutely. He's family. I looked at them in disgust. Minutes ago, they'd united to exclude him. Now, at mention of an expensive gift, they were backtracking. You're right, Dad. He is family, I said. Which is why I won't let you treat him like this. I left, ignoring their protests. At home, my husband saw my face and knew something was wrong. We sat together as I told him everything. He listened quietly, but I saw the hurt in his eyes. He'd spent months planning their surprise, and they couldn't even invite him. What do you want to do? He asked. Cancel the trip, I said immediately. And I'm not attending. I can't celebrate with people who treat you this way. Are you sure? They're your family. I shook my head. You're my family, and I won't let anyone treat my family like this. He nodded and canceled the Maldives reservation. The money refunded instantly. Watching the transaction complete, I felt oddly sad yet relieved. But this was just the beginning of what would become our most intense family conflict. I'll update about what happened next. Things escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. Update 2, that evening, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. First came the calls, Rachel's name flashing on my screen every few minutes, alternating with Mom and Dad's. I silenced them all. Then the messages started flooding in. Please don't do this to me. Rachel texted. The Maldives has always been my dream. Sweetheart, let's talk about this rationally, Mom wrote. Don't make hasty decisions about the trip. Think about your sister's happiness, Dad chimed in. As I scrolled through their messages, something became crystal clear, not one mentioned my husband. Not one expressed regret for trying to exclude him from the wedding. Not one acknowledged how hurtful their actions had been. Every single message focused on one thing, the cancelled honeymoon. You can't cancel the Maldives trip. Rachel's next message read. We already told Mark's parents about it. I felt a cold laugh escape my throat. Of course they had. They'd probably started bragging about their luxury honeymoon the moment I left the house. The trip is already cancelled. The money has been refunded. Don't contact me again, I typed back. Then I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I blocked my sister's number, and my parents' numbers too for good measure. My husband and I spent the rest of the evening watching movies on the couch, trying to pretend everything was normal. But the next morning, our peaceful Saturday was shattered by loud banging on our front door. Before we could even respond, the door burst open. My parents must have used their emergency key, the one I'd given them years ago for actual emergencies. Rachel stormed in first, followed by Mom and Dad. They didn't bother with hellos or explanations. How dare you cancel our honeymoon? Rachel screamed, her face red with anger. You have to reinstate it right now. Calm down, my husband said, standing up from the couch. You can't just burst into our house like this. They ignored him completely, as if he wasn't even there. Do you know how embarrassing this is? Mom demanded. After we already told everyone about the Maldives. Fix this right now, Dad ordered, pointing his finger at me. Call whoever you need to call. We want the trip reinstated immediately. I stood my ground, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I'm not giving expensive gifts to people who don't respect my husband or me. The trip is cancelled, and that's final. Rachel's face contorted with rage. You know what? Don't bother coming to my wedding at all. You're not invited anymore. I don't want you there. Rachel, my husband started to say, but she cut him off. Shut up. This is all your fault. Ever since my sister married you, she's changed. She used to be fun, she used to be normal. I took a deep breath, my voice coming out surprisingly steady. You want to talk about money? Fine, let's talk about the $10,000 I gave you for this wedding. Rachel's face went pale so quickly, I thought she might faint. Mom and Dad stopped their angry muttering. That's right, I continued. $10,000 that I could legally demand back right now, since you've uninvited me from the wedding. That's how gifts work, Rachel. They can be rescinded if the occasion they're meant for no longer applies to the gift giver. You wouldn't, Rachel stammered, her previous bravado completely gone. No, I wouldn't, I agreed. You can keep the money. Consider it your wedding gift from your horrible, unfun sister who doesn't want to come to your wedding anyway. But the Maldives was never yours to begin with. It was a surprise gift from the man you couldn't even be bothered to invite to your wedding, the man you've all treated like an outsider for years. Well, congratulations. You've finally succeeded in pushing us both away completely. Rachel's face crumpled and she burst into tears. But I dreamed about the Maldives my whole life. It's not fair. Mom and Dad immediately wrapped their arms around her, like they always had when we were kids and she didn't get her way. They shot me venomous looks as they guided her toward the door. I watched them leave, coddling my sobbing sister between them, and felt nothing, no guilt, no sadness, just exhaustion. The door clicked shut behind them, and suddenly the house was quiet again. My husband came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. I leaned back against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. I'm so tired, I whispered. Tired of their arrogance, tired of them only thinking about themselves, tired of them treating us, like this. I know, he said softly, kissing the top of my head. I turned to face him, a small smile forming on my lips despite everything. You know what? Let's do something with that refunded money. Something for us. What did you have in mind? We've been talking about getting a new car. $20,000 would make a nice down payment. My husband grinned. I might have been looking at some options already. Want to go car shopping? Later that day, as we test drove various models at the dealership, I felt lighter than I had in months. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that set you free. I'll post one final update soon about what happened after this, including some surprising revelations about the wedding day itself. Update 3, 2 weeks later, we were driving home in our brand new hybrid SUV. It was beautiful, practical, and most importantly, it was ours, a symbol of our life together, our priorities, our future. The day of Rachel's wedding came and went. I spent it deliberately busy. My husband and I took our new car for a long drive along the coast, had lunch at a quiet seaside restaurant, and tried our best not to think about what was happening back in town. But that evening, after we returned home, I couldn't help myself. I opened Instagram and went to Rachel's page. The wedding photos were already up, professionally shot, carefully filtered, perfectly posed. But as I scrolled through them, I noticed something. Her smile never quite reached her eyes. In every photo, even the candid shots, she looked distracted, unsettled, like someone trying too hard to prove they're having the time of their life. 2 days later, my Aunt Susan called. She'd always been my favorite relative, Mom's younger sister, but completely different from her in every way that mattered. I need to tell you something about the wedding, she said, her voice serious. Your mother made a speech, one of those passive-aggressive masterpieces she's so good at. She went on about how families should stick together, how some people become too caught up in their own lives to remember their responsibilities. Then she said something about greed destroying family bonds. I felt my chest tighten. Let me guess, everyone knew exactly who she was talking about? Oh honey, it was about as subtle as a brick through a window. The whole room was uncomfortable. Even some of Mark's family were whispering, asking what was going on. I took a deep breath and told her everything, the uninvited husband, the Maldives trip, Rachel's tantrum, all of it. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. You did the right thing, she said finally, her voice firm. I've watched for years as they've treated your husband like an outsider. It's not right, and it's not your fault. Your mother and Rachel, they've always been like this, always had to have everything their way. Tears welled up in my eyes. Thank you, Aunt Susan. You don't know how much that means to me. After we hung up, I sat in our backyard for a long time, watching the sunset. My husband found me there and brought out 2 glasses of wine. Penny for your thoughts, he asked, settling into the chair beside me. I was just thinking about family, I said, taking a sip. About how sometimes the hardest decisions are the right ones. Do you think you'll ever reconcile with them? Honestly? No. They haven't changed in 45 years, they're not going to start now. They'd have to truly understand what they did wrong and make real changes, but I'm not holding my breath. And I'm not going to chase after them anymore. My husband reached over and took my hand. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. I squeezed his hand back, thinking about how far we'd come. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show you what really matters, who really matters. My family might have thought my husband was the outsider, the one who didn't fit in, but they were wrong. He was the one who had shown true family values, loyalty, respect, understanding. As we sat there in our backyard, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue, I felt a profound sense of contentment. Our new car sat in the driveway, a symbol of our shared future. Our home, though quieter now without my family's constant drama, felt more peaceful than ever. Life isn't always about maintaining relationships at any cost. Sometimes it's about having the courage to walk away from toxic situations, even when, especially when, they involve family. It's about choosing peace over chaos, respect over manipulation, and love over obligation. My mother's wedding speech about families sticking together had missed the point entirely. True family isn't about blind loyalty or maintaining appearances. It's about mutual respect, understanding, and supporting each other's happiness. Sometimes the family you choose, the one you build with love, trust, and shared values, is more real than the one you're born into. Looking at my husband's profile in the fading light, I knew with absolute certainty that I'd made the right choice. We might have lost my birth family, but we'd gained something far more valuable: peace, self-respect, and the freedom to live life on our own terms. This is the end of my updates. Thank you all for your support throughout this journey. Sometimes sharing your story helps you see things more clearly, and your comments have helped me stay strong in my decisions. To those dealing with similar family situations, remember that it's okay to choose your own happiness, to set boundaries, and to walk away from relationships that don't serve your well-being, even if they're family. Sometimes that's the most honest expression of self-respect you can show.